He was melting in the street, his flesh bubbling, dissolving like wax under a fierce flame, not from fire, but from the Countess's wrath. The screams had echoed through the stone halls for days, a dreadful symphony that chilled the hearts of servants and villagers alike. And yet, the aristocrats dared not speak, for she was no ordinary woman. She was Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess, a noblewoman whose name would become synonymous with cruelty and unspeakable horror. But to understand what happened that night, we have to go back to a time when Hungary was a land of political upheaval, fear of Ottoman invasion, and dark superstition. A time when power was wielded by bloodline and iron fist, and one woman's desperate quest for eternal youth would lead to a trail of terror. The year was 1602. The Kingdom of Hungary was a fractured land, a battleground of empires, the Habsburgs in the west and the Ottomans to the east, with local nobility caught in between. Castles loomed like sentinels over dense forests and foggy valleys. Among these castles was Szeged Castle, perched ominously on a rocky hilltop in the remote region of Upper Hungary, today's Slovakia. Within those cold, stone walls lived Elizabeth Báthory, a woman born into one of the most powerful and feared noble families of the region. The Báthory family's name commanded respect and fear, rooted in generations of military conquest and political intrigue. Elizabeth herself was a striking figure, tall and pale, with piercing dark eyes that seemed to see into your soul. Her raven black hair contrasted sharply with the ivory skin she fiercely guarded. From a young age, Elizabeth was groomed for greatness. Her childhood was marked by strict discipline and cold lessons in survival, for in the halls of nobility, weakness was a death sentence. Her marriage at age 15 to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a formidable military commander, cemented her position in the Hungarian aristocracy. Together, they presided over vast estates and hundreds of servants. But Elizabeth's story was not merely about power and privilege. It was about obsession, an obsession with youth, beauty, and the dark secrets whispered in the corridors of her castle. Elizabeth was intelligent and educated, fluent in several languages and skilled in music and poetry. Yet beneath her cultured veneer lay a volatile temper and an unquenchable desire for control. Her servants whispered of her cruelty, of beatings and punishments for the smallest faults. She demanded absolute loyalty and punished disobedience with terrifying severity. Her husband, Count Ferenc, was often away at war, leaving Elizabeth to rule their estates with near absolute authority. Some historians speculate that his absence gave Elizabeth the freedom to indulge darker desires that would soon become legend. According to accounts from the time, Elizabeth believed in the supernatural. She was fascinated by alchemy and witchcraft, searching for the elusive secret of eternal youth. Local folklore suggested that she consulted with sorcerers and alchemists, desperate to stave off the ravages of time. She feared aging and the loss of her beauty above all else. The Blood Countess's cruelty turned from servants to victims when young girls began to disappear from nearby villages. These were mostly peasant girls, vulnerable and easily controlled. Many were brought to Szeged Castle under the guise of employment or charity. Once inside, the castle's gates became a prison from which few escaped. Eyewitness testimonies and later confessions describe horrifying tortures. Girls were starved, beaten, burned with hot irons, and mutilated. Elizabeth supposedly used their blood, bathing in it under the belief it would renew her youth and vitality. This terrifying practice would become her signature horror. But how much of this is true? The line between fact and legend blurs like blood on stone. Some historians argue that Elizabeth was the victim of a politically motivated conspiracy, a woman too powerful for her male contemporaries, who fabricated charges to seize her lands and wealth. Official records from 1611 detail the arrests of Elizabeth and her servants after a servant escaped and reported the atrocities. Over 300 girls were allegedly tortured and killed, but some believe the numbers were exaggerated. Elizabeth was never formally tried but was confined to her castle until her death in 1614. Was she a sadistic monster or a scapegoat for noble rivalries? The truth is buried beneath centuries of myth and propaganda. Beyond the legends lies a real tragedy: the lost lives of hundreds of young women, Many came from poor families seeking work or refuge. Their dreams ended in horror at the hands of the Countess and her accomplices. One girl, Anna Dervulia, a servant, testified that Elizabeth's cruelty was like fire, punishing disobedience with horrific torment. Another victim, a peasant girl named Ilona, vanished without a trace, her screams still echoing in the castle ruins. Elizabeth Báthory's story is one of power, paranoia, and obsession. A woman trapped by the expectations of nobility and haunted by the inevitability of aging. Whether she was a monster or a victim, the stain of blood that marks her name remains. But the darkest chapters are yet to come. The screams finally stopped, but what was found inside the castle walls would haunt the kingdom for centuries. Rooms drenched in blood, bodies hidden behind secret doors, and evidence so grisly that even hardened soldiers recoiled. The Blood Countess's reign of terror was unveiled in horrifying detail. But this nightmare was only the beginning. To understand the full extent of Elizabeth's crimes, we must step inside the castle's darkest chambers, where the boundaries between cruelty, madness, and myth blur into a blood-soaked nightmare. In December 1610, an unlikely escape shattered the silence. A young servant girl, terrified and bleeding, fled Sedged Castle under cover of night. Her story ignited an investigation that would expose one of history's most notorious serial killers. King Matthias II ordered a formal inquiry. Led by Judge István Magyari and a team of trusted soldiers and officials, the search began. The castle, a labyrinth of stone corridors and hidden rooms, was soon crawling with investigators. What they found was beyond belief. Behind a hidden door in the dungeons, they discovered the first bodies, mutilated, tortured, beyond recognition. Over the next days, more victims surfaced, some still alive, others long dead, their bodies arranged like grotesque trophies. Eyewitnesses and survivors spoke of unimaginable cruelty. Young women starved and beaten, locked in cramped cages, and forced to endure sadistic experiments. The Countess's obsession with youth was more than superstition. It was a macabre ritual. Witnesses described Elizabeth bathing in tubs of blood, believed to rejuvenate her skin. Servants were accused of assisting her, sometimes by luring girls or inflicting torture themselves. During the trial, the testimonies were chilling. One servant, Dorothea, confessed to helping Elizabeth in exchange for protection, but she also revealed the Countess's terrifying temper. Another witness, Kotkiv, described hearing the Countess's screams as she tortured her victims. She would say, "I am the sun and they are my shadows," Kata recalled, trembling. The testimonies painted a picture of a woman who was at once a ruthless ruler and a tortured soul, consumed by fear of death and an insatiable hunger for eternal beauty. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Elizabeth Báthory was never formally tried in court. Her noble status protected her. Instead, King Matthias II ordered that she be confined to her castle, sealed inside a small windowless room. Her accomplices, however, were tried and convicted. Several were executed for their crimes. Elizabeth spent the last years of her life imprisoned, reportedly descending into madness and despair. Servants claimed to hear her screams echoing through the stone walls until her death in 1614. For centuries, historians have debated the truth behind Elizabeth's story. Was she truly the sadistic killer described in witness accounts? Or was she a victim of political conspiracy designed to strip her of power and wealth? Some argue that the charges were exaggerated or fabricated by rivals who coveted her lands. Others point to the lack of a formal trial and the destruction of many original documents as suspicious. Yet, the sheer number of testimonies and the discovery of bodies make it difficult to dismiss all claims. Elizabeth Báthory's story inspired countless legends. The Blood Countess, who bathed in the blood of virgins to keep her youth, a vampiric figure long before Dracula's rise. Her tale has been retold in books, films, and folklore, blending fact and fiction into a dark mythos. She remains one of history's most infamous female serial killers, a symbol of cruelty, obsession, and the dangers of absolute power. The Blood Countess's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human cruelty, the abuse of power, and the lengths some will go to escape mortality. It is a story of a woman consumed by fear and vanity, whose actions destroyed hundreds of innocent lives. Yet it is also a cautionary tale about how history can be shaped by those who control the narrative. In the end, Elizabeth Báthory's blood still stains the pages of history, a dark reminder of the fragile line between myth and reality, justice and vengeance. The walls of Sedge Castle echoed with screams. Some say they belonged to Elizabeth herself. Was she truly mad? Or was she haunted by the ghosts of her victims? As her imprisonment dragged on, Elizabeth Báthory's mind began to unravel, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. To understand her final descent, we must look beyond the gruesome acts into the very soul of the Blood Countess. Locked away in her cold stone cell, Elizabeth was consumed by isolation, guilt, and fear. Letters from her family show a woman plagued by paranoia, desperate to maintain control even in captivity. Some historians suggest she suffered from a severe psychological disorder, possibly psychosis, triggered by trauma and extreme stress. Others believe she embraced madness as a form of escape from the horrors she had unleashed. Her once fiery spirit faded into shadows, a broken noblewoman trapped by her own dark legacy. The most enduring image of Elizabeth is of her bathing in the blood of virgins, a terrifying ritual said to preserve her youth. But how much of this is myth? Historical records do not confirm such practices explicitly. Rather, the story grew from fear, gossip, and legend. Blood bathing likely symbolizes her cruelty, twisted into a vampire myth by later storytellers. This blend of fact and folklore has immortalized her in dark fairy tales, a cautionary figure whose story warns against vanity, power, and inhumanity. Centuries later, Elizabeth Báthory's story continues to captivate and horrify. She has become a cultural icon, inspiring books, movies, operas, and even heavy metal songs. Some modern authors explore her as a misunderstood woman, a victim of her time's brutal politics and misogyny. Others hold fast to the image of a monstrous killer. Her legend raises difficult questions about historical truth, the power of storytelling, and the fine line between villain and victim. Today, Sedge Castle stands in ruins, a silent witness to the horrors once committed there. Tourists flock to the site, drawn by the macabre tales. Elizabeth's life and crime serve as a stark reminder of how power, obsession, and fear can corrupt the human soul. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about the past, but about ourselves. The Blood Countess's tale is more than a story of murder. It is a mirror held up to humanity's darkest impulses. It challenges us to ask, what drives people to cruelty? How does power corrupt? And how do legends shape our understanding of justice and evil? Elizabeth Báthory may be gone, but the shadows she cast remain, haunting reminders of the fragile line between history and myth, sanity and madness. It was a foggy morning in 2023 when Hungarian historians stumbled upon a forgotten chest buried beneath the dusty floors of an ancient manor near Sedge Castle. Inside, a collection of letters, court documents, and personal diaries were uncovered. Documents that could rewrite the infamous story of Elizabeth Báthory. Among the fragile papers was a chilling letter from Elizabeth herself, written in the days before her imprisonment, begging for mercy and denying the accusations with desperate clarity. Other letters suggested a complex web of political intrigue and betrayal that may have sealed her fate. If these documents are authentic, they could challenge centuries of accepted history and raise haunting questions. Was Elizabeth Báthory truly the monster history remembers, or a victim of a deadly conspiracy? To understand the weight of this discovery, we must first step back and explore the world Elizabeth lived in, a world shaped by fear, superstition, and ruthless politics. Elizabeth Báthory was born into one of the most powerful noble families in Hungary during the late 16th century. The country was a battleground, caught between the Ottoman Empire's relentless expansion and the Habsburg monarchy's attempts to consolidate control. Nobles, like the Báthorys, wielded enormous power, controlling vast estates and armies of retainers. Feudal loyalty was fragile, and alliances were forged and broken with deadly consequences. In this volatile landscape, women of noble birth could command influence through marriage, family ties, and cunning, but they were also vulnerable to political machinations that saw them as pawns or threats. Elizabeth's life was shaped not only by her family's wealth, but by the violent, unstable world around her. The chest found near Sedge Castle contained 47 documents, some written in Elizabeth's own hand. Among them was a letter dated January 1610, just months before her arrest, in which she insists, "I have never harmed a soul without cause." These accusations are fabrications crafted by those who covet my lands and hate my name. Historians have spent months authenticating the documents, analyzing handwriting and ink composition. Early findings suggest these papers could be genuine. One diary, purportedly belonging to a close servant, tells of a growing feud between Elizabeth and local nobles, some of whom stood to gain financially from her downfall. These revelations force a reconsideration of the narrative. Was Elizabeth a sadistic killer, or a powerful woman caught in a deadly game of politics and greed? Despite the controversy, the fate of the young women associated with Elizabeth's court remains tragic. Archival records reveal names, ages, and origins of some victims. Many were young peasants or servants lured by promises of work or shelter. They came from villages torn apart by war and famine, desperate for survival. One victim, Anna Dervulia, was only 14 years old. Her mother's grief recorded in a faded letter pleading for justice. Reconstructing their lives reveals the human cost beneath the legends. These were real people, not just numbers or myths, who suffered amid a brutal world. Modern forensic psychologists have attempted to analyze Elizabeth's personality using the historical record. Some suggest she suffered from narcissistic personality disorder, characterized by grandiosity, a need for admiration, and lack of empathy. Others point to borderline personality traits, intense mood swings, fear of abandonment, and impulsive behavior. Yet, without direct evidence, these remain educated guesses. What is clear is that Elizabeth was a complex woman, shaped by trauma, power, and isolation. Her cruelty, if real, may have been fueled by a twisted need for control in a world that often denied women agency. One of the most persistent theories is that Elizabeth was a victim of a political setup. Her vast estates made her a target for ambitious nobles eager to seize her wealth. Her nephew and heir, Georgi Thurzo, was appointed to lead the investigation, a man who stood to benefit from her downfall. Some historians argue the trial was rushed and lacked proper evidence. Tortured testimonies and coerced confessions were used to build the case. Could Elizabeth have been sacrificed to settle old scores and redistribute power? In early 17th century Hungary, fear of witchcraft and demons was rampant. The Catholic Church wielded immense influence, and accusations of witchcraft were often used as political weapons. Elizabeth's alleged cruelty was conflated with supernatural evil. Stories of blood bathing and vampire-like behavior echoed the era's obsession with the occult. Her trial took on a tone of a witch hunt, a mix of legal prosecution and spiritual condemnation. Elizabeth Báthory's story has been distorted by centuries of sensationalism. Blood bathing? No definitive proof. Hundreds of victims? Likely exaggerated, though dozens were documented. Her image as a vampire-like figure is a product of folklore, fueled by fear and misogyny. But beneath the myths lies a disturbing truth. A noble woman accused of horrific crimes, whose trial reflected the brutal realities of her time. From Bram Stoker's Dracula to modern horror films, Elizabeth's legend persists. She's portrayed as everything from a seductive villainess to a tragic antihero. Her story resonates because it touches primal fears of cruelty, power, and eternal youth. Elizabeth Báthory's tale forces us to confront how justice was shaped by gender and power. Was she condemned because she was a powerful woman? Because society feared her independence? Her story invites reflection on how history judges women who defy norms. The Blood Countess remains a haunting figure, part historical fact, part terrifying myth. Her story is a mirror reflecting society's darkest impulses and the timeless struggle for power. To understand Elizabeth Báthory, we must peer beyond legend into the complex human psyche of a noble woman isolated by privilege and power. What drove Elizabeth? Historians and psychologists have long debated. Modern forensic psychology offers some insight, though the centuries-old veil of myth clouds any definitive diagnosis. Narcissistic personality disorder. NPD Elizabeth exhibited traits consistent with NPD. Grandiosity, a hunger for admiration, and a ruthless quest for control. Her obsession with youth and beauty fits the classic pattern of an individual desperately clinging to a fading identity. Borderline personality disorder. BPD. Some experts suggest her alleged violent outbursts and extreme behaviors could stem from BPD, characterized by emotional instability, fear of abandonment, and intense interpersonal conflicts. Psychopathy. The cold, calculated nature of the crimes attributed to her, along with a lack of empathy, fits some descriptions of psychopathy. Yet psychopathy usually includes a superficial charm, and Elizabeth's reputation was one of a domineering and feared matron, not necessarily charming. Trauma and isolation. Elizabeth was raised in a harsh environment, losing family members early, and thrust into a role demanding strength and ruthlessness. Her isolation as a powerful woman in a patriarchal society could have exacerbated any underlying psychological issues. These profiles cannot fully explain her actions or the truth behind the accusations, but they hint at a woman both feared and misunderstood. Too often, the victims of history's villains become faceless statistics. Recent research has sought to restore humanity to those young women who suffered under Elizabeth's rule. Anna Darvulia. At just 14 years old, Anna was a peasant girl who sought refuge in a castle, hoping to work as a maid. A letter from her mother, written years later, speaks of endless searching and heartbreak. Anna's story reminds us that these were real people, with families, dreams, and fears. Catalin Benexky, another young servant whose name appears in court testimonies. Catalin was known for her gentle spirit and quick smile, qualities that reportedly earned Elizabeth's jealousy. She disappeared after a sudden illness, which some say was the beginning of the Blood Countess's campaign of terror. Ilona Juhas, a shepherd's daughter from a nearby village. Ilona's fate is recorded in a fragmented diary entry recovered from the archives. Her last words were said to be a prayer for mercy. Each victim's brief life paints a picture of innocence lost, and the cruelty inflicted upon them remains a somber reminder of the costs of unchecked power. Was Elizabeth Báthory truly guilty of the horrific crimes ascribed to her? Or was she a victim of a ruthless conspiracy? The political climate of early 17th century Hungary was brutal. The Habsburgs sought to consolidate power, often by neutralizing independent nobles. Elizabeth's vast estates were a prize coveted by many. Georgi Thurzo, her nephew, led the investigation, a man who benefited directly from her downfall. Evidence supporting the conspiracy theory includes the lack of direct eyewitness testimony of murders, confessions obtained under torture, which modern legal standards deem unreliable, swift imprisonment without trial. Elizabeth was never formally sentenced or allowed defense. Some historians argue this was a calculated removal of a powerful, independent woman threatening the status quo. Religion played a crucial role in Elizabeth's trial. The Catholic Church was at the height of its power during the Counter-Reformation. Accusations of witchcraft and devil worship were powerful tools to discredit enemies. Elizabeth's alleged practices, blood bathing, occult rituals, fit the mold of the witch as imagined by fearful contemporaries. Her trial blurred the lines between legal prosecution and spiritual exorcism, transforming her into a symbol of evil. The most sensational story associated with Elizabeth is that she bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth. Historians caution against accepting this at face value. No contemporary accounts from the trial or witnesses mention this practice. The legend appears first in pamphlets published decades after her death. This may be a conflation of folklore, superstition, and propaganda. While Elizabeth's obsession with youth is documented, the bloodbath remains a powerful myth, one that captured imaginations but likely distorted reality. From Gothic novels to horror films, Elizabeth has been immortalized as the ultimate femme fatale. Bram Stoker's Dracula drew inspiration from her legend. Films often emphasize vampiric elements and sadism. Music and art have portrayed her variably as a villain, victim, or a tragic antihero? Why does her story endure? It touches on primal fears of death, power, and beauty. It challenges perceptions of female cruelty. It reflects society's fascination with the macabre. Elizabeth's story raises important questions about justice. Was she punished for crimes she did not commit? How much did gender bias influence her trial and legacy? Were powerful women in her era always at risk of demonization? Her story reveals the dangers of mixing fear, power, and prejudice. A cautionary tale still relevant today. Elizabeth Báthory remains an enigma, a woman who inspires horror and pity in equal measure. The new documents uncovered offer a fresh perspective, but raise more questions than answers. Her story is a mirror to humanity's darkest impulses, and a reminder that history is often written by those who hold power.